The carousel was still turning when the message came through. I had my coat folded over one arm and my grandmother's quilt wrapped in brown paper and tied with kitchen twine the way she used to package things for the mail tucked under the other, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I set the quilt down between my feet carefully, the way you set down something that has survived longer than most of the people you love, and read the screen. "Hey, Mom. Actually, Rachel thinks it might be better if we keep this weekend to her family and our close friends. You know how she gets overwhelmed. Rain check? No period. No apology. Rain check, like I was a dentist appointment. Like I was something to be penciled in later, when convenient, when the house was less full of people who mattered more. I stood there at baggage claim in Denver International Airport, fluorescent lights humming above me, strangers pulling their luggage off the belt with the efficient ease of people who knew where they were going. A woman in a yellow jacket laughed into her phone. A man in a suit checked his watch twice in 30 seconds. The world moved at its normal speed, indifferent and brisk. I did not move. I read the message again. Then once more. I kept thinking I had misread it, that some word would rearrange itself into something kinder on the second or third pass. It didn't. Words like that never do. I had booked this flight 6 weeks ago. I had told my son I was coming. I had written them down in the little notepad I keep by the phone at home, the one with the rooster on the cover that my daughter-in-law gave me 2 Christmases ago back when she still gave me things. I had packed the quilt 3 days in advance, the one my grandmother stitched herself from flour sack fabric during the Depression, the one that had warmed 3 generations of firstborns in our family. I had planned to give it to them for the baby's room. They were 4 months along. A boy, they'd said. My first grandchild, by blood. I picked the quilt back up off the floor. The taxi line was short. The driver asked if I was visiting family. I said yes. It wasn't entirely a lie, just not the family I'd planned on. I chose a hotel near downtown that looked clean and quiet in the photos online, the kind with a small lobby and a complimentary breakfast that nobody really eats. The woman at the front desk smiled when I checked in and asked if I was in town for anything fun. I smiled back and told her I wasn't sure yet. She handed me my key card without pressing further. I appreciated that more than she'll ever know. The room was on the 4th floor, facing a courtyard with a dry fountain and 2 iron benches. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and stood at the window for a long time without taking off my coat. It was late October. The trees in the courtyard had gone orange and brown, a few leaves still clinging on with the particular stubbornness of things that aren't ready to let go. I know that feeling. I finally sat down on the edge of the bed and unwrapped the quilt from its brown paper. It came open slowly, the way old things unfold with dignity, with patience. Pale blue squares and cream-colored triangles, each one hand-stitched with the kind of precision that takes time nobody has anymore. My grandmother had made this in 1938. My mother had slept under it as a baby. I had slept under it during a winter when the furnace broke and we couldn't afford to fix it for 3 weeks. My son had slept under it when he had the chicken pox at age 7, feverish and miserable, and I had sat beside him reading Charlotte's Web until his eyes closed. I laid it out on the hotel bed and smoothed the edges flat. Then I sat in the chair by the window and let the silence do what silence does. My son was not always the man who sends messages like that. I want to be fair about this because fairness matters to me even when it costs something. He was a good child. Not perfect, none of them are. But good, curious and funny and capable of a kindness that could catch you off guard. He used to leave notes on the kitchen counter when he knew I'd had a hard day. Just small things. Dinner's in the oven. Love you, Em. He used to call on Sunday evenings and talk for an hour about nothing in particular, which is the best kind of talking. Then he met his wife. Then his first marriage ended, quietly and painfully, the way those things do. His first wife, Laura, was a warm woman with a loud laugh who loved him well for 11 years. When she died of ovarian cancer 3 years ago, she left behind a daughter, my granddaughter, who is 19 now and finishing her second year of college 2 states away. She inherited her mother's laugh and her father's stubbornness, and she is the clearest-eyed person I know. After Laura passed, my son grieved in the way some men do, by moving fast, by filling space. He met Rachel 14 months later. She is not unkind, exactly, but she has a particular way of deciding who belongs in a room, and I have never quite made the list. I understood this gradually. The way you understand something, you don't want to understand. The invitation for Christmas that came a week after everyone else had received theirs. The phone calls that got shorter, then less frequent, then stopped, unless I initiated. The way my son's voice shifted slightly when she was in the room, a little more formal, a little less mine. I told myself it was an adjustment. I told myself new marriages need room to breathe. I told myself a great many things in the 2 years since they wed, and I was patient with myself for believing most of them. But here I was, Denver, 4th floor, a quilt on a hotel bed, and a rain check on my phone. I took out my own notepad, not the rooster one, a plain one, and wrote 2 things. The first was the name of a lawyer I'd looked up online that afternoon from the airport while I waited to see if he would text again. He didn't. Her name was Patricia Holt, and her firm had an office 8 blocks from the hotel. The second was my granddaughter's number. I texted her first. "Sweetheart, are you free to talk this week? I'm in Denver for a few days. Long story. I'd love to see your face." She called me back in 11 minutes. "Grandma, what happened? Dad said you weren't coming." I pressed the phone against my ear and looked at the dry fountain in the courtyard below. "He changed his mind for me," I said. "But I'm here anyway." There was a pause. Not an empty one, the kind that holds things. "I'll come," she said. "I can drive up Friday. I don't care about his party." I told her she didn't have to do that. She said she knew she was coming anyway. I did not cry. I wanted to, briefly, but the feeling passed through me like weather and left something steadier behind it. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap, the way I do at home, without fussing, and I drank it standing at the bathroom sink. Then I got into bed with my clothes on, pulled the quilt up over my chest, and slept. The law office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building sandwiched between a coffee shop and a framing store. The kind of building that had probably been something else twice before and would be something else again. Patricia Holt met me in the hall herself. A woman somewhere in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and the matter-of-fact energy of someone who had heard most of what the world had to offer and taken good notes. She showed me to a chair and poured water without being asked. I liked her immediately. "I need to update my will," I said, "and I need to establish a trust for my granddaughter." She opened her notepad. "Any specific changes?" "Yes. I want to remove my son as the primary beneficiary. I want everything held in trust for my granddaughter. Education, health, and a first home purchase are the only allowable draws until she turns 26. After that, full access." Patricia didn't react with pity or alarm. She wrote steadily. "And your reasoning?" "Just for the record. Because she drove 3 hours to see me in a hotel I didn't plan on staying in, and because she called me back in 11 minutes. Patricia looked up then. Something passed across her face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite something else. "Understood," she said. "We can have the documents ready by tomorrow afternoon." I signed the first set of papers that afternoon. The pen felt neither heavy nor light. It felt correct, the way it feels to finally say a thing you've been thinking for longer than you'd admitted. Walking back to the hotel, I stopped at a diner on the corner that had a handwritten menu in the window and booths the color of old mustard. I went inside and sat down by the window and ordered coffee and a slice of apple pie because the woman ahead of me had one and it looked like something worth having. The coffee came strong. The pie had real butter in the crust. I ate slowly and watched the street outside. A man walked a large dog who walked him back. Two women argued cheerfully about something and then laughed. A boy on a bicycle rode past, standing up on the pedals, the way boys do when they think no one is watching. No one needed anything from me. No one was performing patience in my direction. I finished the pie, paid the check, and left a tip that was more generous than it needed to be, because the woman who served me had called me hun, without making it feel like anything other than what it was. I have lived 67 years on this earth. I taught 4th grade for 22 of them. I was married to a good man for 31 years. I buried him on a Tuesday in March, 6 years ago, when the forsythia was just starting to show yellow against our fence, and I thought then that the world had a certain cruelty in blooming on days like that. My husband would have had things to say about this situation. He was not a man who raised his voice, but he was a man who said the true thing clearly, without dressing it up. He would have looked at me over his coffee cup and said, "You didn't raise him to do this." Not as an accusation of my son, and not as absolution for him either, just as a fact. The same way he'd say it's raining or the car needs an oil change, something that was simply true and had to be worked with. We had been trying for a second child when we lost one at 4 months. My son was 3. He didn't understand, of course, but he climbed into my lap that afternoon without being asked, with his small, warm weight and his plastic fire truck still in his hand, and he stayed there until I stopped shaking. I have never forgotten that. I am not sure I am supposed to forget it. It lives in me the way certain things do not as a wound anymore, just as something true about who he was before the world got its hands on him. The folder I keep in my filing cabinet at home, not the one labeled taxes or house, the one I made for my son, has 14 years of paper in it. I had photographed every page before I left Ohio, not because I planned to use them, because I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining the weight of it. The first entry is from when they were first married and had the plumbing emergency in the apartment, $1,800. Wired the same day he called, which was a Wednesday, and I remember because I had just gotten home from a parent-teacher conference and hadn't eaten dinner yet. The next is the car repair, $900. Then the deposit on the house they eventually bought. I gave $15,000 toward the down payment. He said he'd pay it back. The words "pay it back" appear in an email he sent me on March 3rd of that year, and I have the email. After that, the hospital bill, when his appendix came out and the coverage didn't cover as much as they'd hoped. $3,400. A tax debt from the year his business had a bad quarter. $6,000. Flights for Laura's memorial that they couldn't swing that year. $1,200 for 2 tickets so he and my granddaughter could go together and not have to think about the cost. A refrigerator. A new laptop for Rachel when hers broke. What he called a temporary loan last spring. $4,500 for a deposit on this new house. The one I was standing outside of from the sidewalk at this very moment. The total, not counting time, not counting the meals I stocked when I visited, not counting the years of holidays I drove 6 hours to host so they wouldn't have to, the total on paper is $41,000. I am not a wealthy woman. I am a woman who lived carefully for 40 years and who made choices, and I made most of those choices without being asked, because that is what mothers do, and for a long time I thought that was enough. It wasn't the money. If he had called me last Sunday just to say he was thinking of me, every dollar would have sat differently in my chest. But the calls stopped, and what replaced them was a particular kind of silence. Not the comfortable kind you have with someone you know well, but the kind that fills in slowly, like water finding a low place, until one day you realize you are standing in it up to your knees and wondering when it got so cold. I called the bank from the hotel room the next morning before breakfast. The woman on the phone was professional and thorough and asked me all the right security questions. I answered them steadily. When she pulled up my account, She listed the active transfers: a monthly direct deposit to my son's account of $600, labeled in my online banking as MISC support, a quarterly transfer of $1,500 he had helped me set up 2 years ago that he said was for household expenses, and an annual gift disbursement I had set up for his birthday, $2,000, due in 3 weeks. Cancel all 3, I said, permanently. And should we remove the secondary account access? She asked. He had been listed as an authorized viewer of my accounts since his father passed, just so someone could keep an eye on things, he'd said. I had thought it was thoughtful. I see it differently now. Remove it, I said. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No. That's what I needed. I thanked her and hung up and poured myself another cup of the hotel coffee, which was not good, and drank it anyway. My granddaughter arrived on Friday afternoon. She drove a small blue car that looked like it needed a new muffler and parked it in the hotel lot with the careless efficiency of someone for whom parking is still an adventure rather than a chore. She walked in wearing jeans and her mother's old leather jacket, the brown one with the brass buttons that Laura used to wear to every school event. And when she saw me, she crossed the lobby at a pace that was almost running and hugged me with both arms. She smelled like shampoo and cold air. I held on longer than I usually do. She let me. We ate at a Mexican restaurant 3 blocks away with good chips and better salsa. And she told me about her classes, her roommate, the professor who had changed the essay deadline without telling anyone, and then she set down her fork and said quietly, "Grandma, he called me Thursday. He asked if I'd talk to you." I took a slow sip of my water. I said I had. She looked at me steadily. "He said you'd misunderstood the situation, that Rachel wasn't feeling well and it wasn't about you." I put my glass down. "Did you believe him?" She was quiet for exactly the right amount of time. "No," she said. I told her then. "Not everything. Not the folder, not the numbers, but the shape of it. How it had been gradual. How I had made myself patient. How a person can spend years explaining away the evidence of a thing until one afternoon, in an airport baggage claim, it arranges itself into something undeniable." She listened without interrupting. "This is rarer than it sounds. What did you do?" she asked when I finished. "I updated my will," I said. "The trust is for you." She sat very still. Before she could speak, I said, "Not because I want to punish him. I want you to understand that. It's because you came. Because you drove 3 hours and didn't ask me to explain it in a way that made him look better. Because you've never made me feel like a problem to manage." Her jaw was tight. She had her mother's jaw, squared off and certain. "You should have told me sooner," she said. "About all of it. I know. I would have. I know you would have, sweetheart." "That's exactly why I didn't." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her fingers were cold from the glass. We sat like that for a while, not saying much. And it was the best I had felt in longer than I could accurately measure. She stayed 2 nights. We went to a used bookstore on Saturday, and I bought a novel. I probably won't finish, and she bought 3 that she will. We walked along the river path in the morning with coffee from a cart run by a young man who'd clearly been at it since before dawn and was proud of his work. We watched a family of ducks argue over a piece of bread. We laughed at things I couldn't tell you about afterward, the way you laugh when the tension is finally gone somewhere else. On Saturday evening, my phone rang. My son. I answered it. I wasn't sure I would until I did. "Hey, Mom." His voice had that careful lightness men use when they know they're on uncertain ground. "Just wanted to check in. Make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," I said. "I'm in Denver, actually." Silence. A long one. You came anyway?" "I had plane tickets," I said. It seemed wasteful not to use them. "Mom, you don't have to explain," I told him. I said it quietly, not coldly. The way you say something to close a door gently rather than slam it. I understand the situation. I hope the housewarming went well. I should have called you before. Yes, you should have. Another silence. I could hear him breathing. I could hear something else in there. Something that in another version of this story might become an apology. But it didn't. It circled the drain of one and went somewhere else. Can we talk when you're back? He asked. You have my number, I said. Take care of yourself. I hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment with my hands in my lap. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel sad. I felt clear, the way a room feels after you've finally opened all the windows. Before I left Denver, I went back to Patricia Holt's office and signed the final documents. The trust was drawn up cleanly, the terms I'd specified exact and unambiguous. My granddaughter would receive access for education, medical needs, and a first home. Full control at 26. The rest of the estate, the house in Ohio, the savings account, the small portfolio my husband had built carefully over 30 years, redirected in its entirety. Patricia slid the blue folder across the desk. Everything is in order. I said thank you. She said she hoped things would improve. I told her I believed they already had. The flight home was uneventful. I read a magazine I'd bought in the terminal, the kind with recipes and decorating ideas and advice about things I mostly know already. I ordered tomato juice because I always do. The woman beside me slept with her head tipped against the window, and there was something peaceful about sitting next to someone who trusted the sky enough to close their eyes in it. Ohio was gray and cold when we landed, the kind of gray that isn't dramatic about itself. I found it comforting. The cab driver carried my suitcase to the door without being asked. I tipped him well. Inside, the house smelled the way it always does, a little like dust and a little like the lavender soap I keep by the kitchen sink. I walked through each room without turning on the lights, letting my eyes adjust, the way you do when you've been away, and you need to remember that the place still knows you. I made myself tea, not from a small foil packet, my tea, in my mug, with a real spoonful of honey and the chamomile I keep in the blue tin above the stove. My husband brought that tin back from a trip to Vermont years ago, before we knew how many trips we didn't have left. I use it every day. Some things you keep using because you can't stop without admitting too much. I sat in the chair by the front window and looked at the garden. The mums were past their peak but still making an effort, rust-colored and stubborn, holding their heads up despite the cold. I thought about what they needed. I thought about how I'd deadhead them in the spring and let something new come up in their place. Then I went to the filing cabinet. The folder labeled with my son's name was where I always kept it, behind taxes, in front of medical. I took it out and carried it to the kitchen table. I didn't open it dramatically. I didn't read every page again. I'd already read them. I already knew what was in them. Sometimes the point isn't to understand a thing more, it's simply to be done with it. I fed the pages into the shredder one by one, slowly, not in anger. The machine made its steady sound, paper becoming something smaller and less legible. 14 years of quiet accounting. Every check, every wire confirmation, every email thread that began with, "Hey, I hate to ask." I shredded all of it. When the folder was empty, I folded it flat and put it in the recycling bin under the sink. Then I took the quilt out of my suitcase. I had not given it to my son's household. I had thought about it not as a grand gesture, but as a question. Was there somewhere it still belonged? I had carried it to Denver and carried it back. It had never left my hands. I laid it across the guest bed instead, the room where my granddaughter sleeps when she visits. Blue and cream, still perfect, still quiet, still carrying everything it was made to carry. It looked right there, better than right. I stood in the doorway, looking at it for a long moment. She would come for Thanksgiving, my granddaughter had said before she drove back south. She'd made a point of it. She'd said, "I want you to show me how to make the stuffing the way you do it." She has her whole life in front of her, and she wants to spend part of it in my kitchen. and I find that I am not going to waste one moment of it pretending that anything could be more important. My son sent a text 2 days after I got home. It said, "Hope the flight was okay." I read it 3 times. I put my phone face down on the counter and went back to the dishes I was washing. I answered it eventually. I said, "It was fine. Take care." That was all I had. I've been thinking, since then, about the word patient. It is a virtue, they say. And maybe it is. But there is a version of patience that isn't virtue at all. It's just waiting dressed up in better clothes. Waiting for someone to treat you the way you've always treated them. Waiting for an apology that knows its own name. Waiting to stop being the person who volunteers their presence at every table and quietly clears the space when they're told it isn't convenient. I was that kind of patient for a long time. I'm not anymore. The quilt is on the guest bed. The will is signed. The money is redirected. The folder is shredded. The housewarming happened without me, and the world did not end, and neither did I. What ended was the pretending. And what I found on the other side of it, sitting in that diner with coffee and pie, walking along a river with my granddaughter, sleeping under a hotel comforter, in a city where no one needed anything from me, was something I had let myself forget I was allowed to have. Myself. Just myself. Intact. If you have watched this far, I imagine you know something about what I'm describing. I imagine you have your own version of the folder, your own version of the airport, your own version of the text message that rearranges something permanently. Here is what I want to say to you. You are not the problem in the sentence. You never were. And the kindness you have given, the quiet, consistent, unglamorous kind, the kind that doesn't take pictures of itself, it counted. It counts. Not because someone acknowledged it, but because you know what it cost and you gave it anyway. And that says something true and lasting about who you are. You are allowed to stop funding a silence. You are allowed to rewrite the document. You are allowed to get on the plane, change the will, shred the paper, and go eat pie by yourself in a city where no one expects anything of you and feel, for the first time in years, like you belong to yourself again. Pull the chair up to your own table. Cook the meal for the person who called you back in 11 minutes. Put the quilt on the bed where it's actually wanted. And if nobody saved you a seat at the celebration, you know what? Good. Go somewhere better. You still have time. I promise you, you still have time. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting in a hotel room with a quilt on the bed and know where they were supposed to be, and they need to know they are not the only one. And they are not too late to begin again.